After a painful betrayal, Sophie must navigate the fragile line between love, trust, and self-discovery. Will she cling to a relationship haunted by lies or find the courage to reclaim her life and start anew? Sophie had always believed love was steady, uncomplicated, almost comforting in its predictability. She and Daniel had been together for 5 years, and in those years she had built her entire world around the idea of them. Their small apartment in the city wasn't perfect. It was cramped, the walls were thin, and the kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people to move around without bumping into each other. But to Sophie, it was home. It was filled with warmth, laughter, and the small rituals that made her life feel whole. Every morning, Daniel would make coffee while Sophie prepared breakfast. They didn't need words. The rhythm of their routine spoke for them. On Sundays, they would sit together at the window, sipping their mugs in silence, watching the city slowly wake up. Sophie believed those moments, fragile and ordinary as they were the essence of happiness. She trusted Daniel entirely, or at least she thought she did. It began innocuously, small shifts so subtle that she almost dismissed them. Daniel started coming home later than usual. At first, he had good reasons: long meetings at work, last-minute assignments from his boss, traffic. Sophie didn't question him. She had always admired his dedication to his job, and she told herself she wouldn't be the kind of girlfriend who nagged or doubted. But then the excuses became more frequent. He'd miss dinner, arriving long after she had gone to bed. Sometimes his shirt smelled faintly of perfume. Not her scent, not the light floral note she wore daily, but something heavier, musky, and undeniably feminine. She noticed the way he kept his phone closer, turning the screen away when he typed. She noticed how he laughed less with her but smiled at messages he never explained. She noticed that when she touched his hand at night, he would hesitate before intertwining his fingers with hers. At first, Sophie convinced herself she was imagining it. Love could make people paranoid, she thought. Relationships had ups and downs, and she told herself that Daniel was simply stressed from work. But deep down, unease began to coil inside her, growing heavier with each unanswered question. One evening, Sophie tried to bring it up. They were sitting at dinner. She had cooked his favorite pasta, the one she used to make on their anniversaries, hoping to rekindle something. He ate quietly, his mind elsewhere. "Daniel, is everything okay with us?" she said softly, setting down her fork. He looked up, startled, as if she had pulled him out of some private world. "Of course. Why would you even ask that?" She hesitated, then forced a smile. "I don't know, you seem distant lately." He reached across the table, taking her hand briefly. His grip was warm, reassuring. "Work's been tough, that's all. I don't want you worrying, okay?" Sophie nodded, trying to believe him. She wanted to believe him. She wanted so desperately for things to be as simple as they once were. But the unease didn't fade. 2 weeks later, it happened. Daniel told her he'd be working late again. Sophie had nodded, kissed him goodbye, and tried to distract herself with the book. But the silence in the apartment was unbearable. Every creak of the building made her glance at the clock, wondering when he would come home. And then, almost without realizing it, she made a choice that would change everything. She grabbed her coat, slipped out the door, and followed him. The city at night felt different, colder, lonelier. Sophie trailed behind Daniel from a safe distance, her heart hammering so loudly she was afraid he'd hear it if he turned around. He walked quickly, confidently, as if he knew exactly where he was going. When he stopped in front of a sleek, unfamiliar apartment building downtown, Sophie's breath caught. She lingered across the street, half hidden in the shadows, as Daniel pulled out a key and unlocked the door. A key. He didn't just visit this place, he belonged here. Minutes stretched into hours as Sophie stood frozen, her stomach twisting with dread. And then the door opened again. She saw her. The woman was striking, with long dark hair and a confident grace that made Sophie's chest ache with inadequacy. She leaned against Daniel, laughing softly, as if she had known him forever. Daniel's hand brushed her arm, casual, familiar, intimate in a way that cut Sophie deeper than any knife. Sophie couldn't breathe. The city blurred around her, sounds muffled by the roar of her heartbeat. She wanted to run, to scream, to confront him right there, but her legs refused to move. It was the woman who noticed her first, her laughter fading as her eyes flicked toward the street. She froze, then stepped back from Daniel. Daniel turned, his expression calm, too calm. When his eyes landed on Sophie, there was no shock, no guilt, only a chilling composure. "Sophie," he said, his voice even, almost casual. "I can explain." The words rang hollow, absurd against the backdrop of betrayal unfolding before her. Sophie's vision blurred with tears. Her body moved before her mind could, turning her away from him, from them, from everything she thought she knew. She walked quickly, then faster, until the city swallowed her whole. Behind her, she thought she heard Daniel call her name, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. That night, Sophie lay awake in the dark apartment that had once felt like home, staring at the ceiling. The quiet was suffocating. Her chest ached with grief she didn't know how to name. Was it anger? Was it heartbreak? Or was it the realization that everything she had believed in was a lie? As dawn crept in through the window, Sophie whispered to herself, her voice raw, "What do I do now?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the first rays of sunlight revealed the cracks in the life she thought she knew. The days after Sophie discovered the truth blurred together, like smudged ink on a once clear page. She went through the motions of her routine, waking up, dressing, going to work, but everything felt hollow, stripped of meaning. The silence in the apartment weighed heavier than ever, pressing against her chest with each passing hour. Daniel hadn't come home the night she saw him with the other woman. He hadn't even texted. That absence spoke louder than words, yet Sophie still clung to a fragile thread of denial. Maybe she hadn't seen what she thought she saw. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, some bizarre coincidence. But she knew better. Deep down, she knew. When Daniel finally returned the next evening, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. She heard the door open, the jingle of his keys, the casual thud of his shoes hitting the floor. For a fleeting second, she hoped, foolishly, that he would come in, fall to his knees, and beg her forgiveness. Instead, Daniel walked into the kitchen, his expression calm, almost rehearsed. "Sophie, we need to talk." Her throat tightened. She had imagined this moment 100 times in the past 24 hours, but when it finally came, she found herself frozen. "Talk?" she echoed, her voice thin. Daniel leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "I'm not going to lie to you. You saw me with her. I should have told you sooner." Her chest burned. "Told me what, Daniel? That you've been cheating on me? That you've been living some double life behind my back?" His jaw tightened, but his tone remained infuriatingly calm. "It's not that simple." She slammed her mug onto the table, the sound sharp, shattering the fragile calm. "Don't you dare say it's not simple. I saw you, with her, at her place. How long has this been going on?" Daniel exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "About 6 months." The words sliced through her like glass. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of secrets, of pretending. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Why, Daniel? Why would you do this to me, to us?" For the first time, his composure faltered. He looked away, his shoulders tense. "I don't know. It just happened. I didn't plan for it. She was there when work got overwhelming. She listened. She made things feel exciting again. And before I realized it, I was in too deep." The betrayal in his words stung worse than the confession itself. Sophie shook her head, her voice trembling. "Exciting? Was I not enough for you?" His eyes softened, but his silence was answer enough. The quiet stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Sophie stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this right now." She walked past him, her body rigid, and shut herself in the bedroom. That night, She cried until her body was empty, until exhaustion dragged her to a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to talk to her. Sometimes he'd knock gently on the door, asking if they could sit down and work things out. Other times, he'd leave notes on the kitchen counter, promises scrawled in hurried handwriting. "I love you, Sophie. I don't want to lose you. Please let me explain." But Sophie couldn't bring herself to face him. She drifted through the apartment like a ghost, avoiding him, avoiding the truth. Her best friend, Emily, noticed almost immediately that something was wrong. "You've been distant," Emily said one afternoon when they met for coffee. "Is everything okay with you and Daniel?" Sophie stared at the steam rising from her cup, debating whether to say it out loud. When she did, there would be no going back. Finally, her voice cracked. "He's been cheating on me." Emily's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Sophie, are you serious?" Sophie nodded, biting her lip as tears threatened to fall again. For 6 months, he admitted it. Emily reached across the table, gripping Sophie's hand tightly. "I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this." The compassion in Emily's voice nearly broke her. Sophie leaned into the comfort, letting the tears spill freely. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "He says he still loves me, but how can he love me and do this at the same time?" Emily's grip tightened. "Love doesn't hurt like this, Soph. If he truly loved you, he wouldn't have betrayed you. You need to think about what you want now, not what he wants." Sophie nodded, but the words lodged like a stone in her chest. What she wanted was impossible. To turn back time, to erase the betrayal, to have her Daniel back, the man who laughed with her on Sunday mornings and kissed her forehead before bed. But that version of him no longer existed. That night, Sophie finally confronted him again. They sat in the living room, the air heavy with tension. Daniel looked tired, his face shadowed with guilt. "I made a mistake, a terrible one, but I still love you. I want to fix this." Sophie's voice was barely audible. "How do you fix something that's already broken?" He leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "We can go to counseling. We can start fresh. I'll end it with her. I already have. I swear to you, it's over." Sophie studied him, searching for sincerity. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he really would try. But the image of him with that woman burned behind her eyelids, a wound that wouldn't close. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said finally. Daniel's shoulders sagged, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, as if he had expected her answer all along. That night, Sophie lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was torn between the comfort of what they had built together and the undeniable truth that it had all been poisoned by betrayal. For the first time, she wondered if love was enough. The apartment no longer felt like home. It was a battlefield, every corner holding fragments of a war Sophie hadn't asked to fight. The kitchen smelled of betrayal, the bedroom whispered of nights that no longer belonged to her, and even the living room, their sanctuary of laughter and quiet evenings, had turned into a cold arena where trust had been shattered. Daniel tried. He really did. He made dinners, left flowers by her bedside, texted her throughout the day just to say, "I'm thinking about you." But each gesture, no matter how tender, felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. For Sophie, love had always been about honesty. Now it was a cruel joke. One Friday evening, Emily convinced Sophie to come over for wine. The cozy apartment was filled with the scent of lavender candles, soft jazz playing in the background. For a few hours, Sophie felt the weight lift off her shoulders as they laughed, sipped wine, and avoided the topic of Daniel. But eventually, Emily leaned forward, her voice serious. "Soph, you can't live in limbo forever. You have to decide. Are you going to try to forgive him, or are you going to walk away?" Sophie stared into her glass, swirling the red liquid slowly. "It's not that easy." "Of course it's not, but right now, you're stuck between two lives. And the longer you stay here, the more it'll eat you alive." Sophie sighed. She knew Emily was right, but the decision felt impossible. To forgive meant swallowing the bitterness of betrayal every day. To leave meant ripping apart 5 years of love, of shared memories and dreams. Later that night, when she returned to the apartment, Daniel was waiting for her. He stood up the moment she walked in, nervous energy radiating from him. "Where were you?" he asked softly. "At Emily's." Her tone was clipped, guarded. Daniel nodded, stepping closer. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I need you to know I'm trying. I've cut things off with her completely. I blocked her number. I told her it was over." Sophie looked into his eyes, searching for any flicker of deceit. He seemed sincere, but sincerity was a mask he had worn before. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you broke something in me. I don't know if it can ever be fixed." His face crumpled. "Then let me try to build something new with you. Please, Sophie, don't give up on us." Her heart clenched, torn between anger and the faint echo of the love she still felt for him. Against her better judgment, she let him hold her that night, his arms wrapping around her like a promise she wanted so desperately to believe. The following weeks were a blur of cautious routines. They went to couples counseling, sitting in stiff chairs while a calm-voiced therapist asked them to unpack years of love and betrayal in 50-minute sessions. Sophie found herself talking more than she expected about her fears, her anger, the hollow space where trust had once lived. Daniel listened, his face heavy with guilt. Sometimes she caught glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the way he smiled when she made a sarcastic joke, the tenderness in his touch when he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Those moments gave her hope, fragile and fleeting. But then the doubts crept back in. At night, when he turned over in bed, she wondered who he was thinking about. When his phone buzzed, even if it was only a work email, her chest tightened with suspicion. The wound was still raw, bleeding beneath the surface. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his phone on the nightstand. The urge clawed at her. Just one look, just one peek, to know for sure. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and hovered over the screen. But then she stopped. If she had to spy on him, then there was no trust left to salvage. And without trust, what was the point? She put the phone back down, her heart pounding, and buried her face in her hands. A week later, Sophie ran into someone she hadn't seen in years, Michael, an old college friend, at a bookstore downtown. "Sophie?" he said, his eyes lighting up. She turned, surprised. "Michael, wow, it's been forever." They hugged, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of genuine joy. They spent hours catching up over coffee, talking about old times and where life had taken them. Michael was easy to talk to, his laughter warm and contagious. When she finally returned home that evening, Daniel was waiting with dinner on the table. He smiled, but Sophie noticed the flicker of unease in his eyes. "You're late," he said lightly. "I ran into Michael. We caught up over coffee." Daniel froze. "Michael? As in, your old friend from college?" "Yes," Sophie said, raising an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" He forced a smile, but his jaw was tight. "No, of course not. I'm glad you had a good time." But later that night, Sophie noticed the irony. Here was Daniel, jealous over an innocent coffee with a friend, while he had spent months betraying her with another woman. The hypocrisy stung. The tension grew. Daniel became more protective, asking where she was going, who she was with. Sophie resented it, snapping at him for questioning her every move. The fights escalated, shouted arguments that ended with slammed doors and tear-streaked silences. One night, after another explosive fight, Sophie stormed out of the apartment. She wandered the city streets, her anger burning hot and cold all at once. She ended up at Emily's again, collapsing onto her couch. "I can't do this anymore," Sophie whispered, her voice raw. "Every day feels like a test I'm failing." Emily stroked her hair gently. "Maybe that's your answer, Soph. Maybe it's time to stop trying." But was it? Sophie didn't know. She couldn't imagine her life without Daniel, yet she also couldn't imagine living the rest of it under the shadow of betrayal. One evening, Sophie returned home to find Daniel waiting with a small box in his hands. "I know this doesn't fix everything," he said, his voice trembling, "but I want to prove I'm serious about us." He opened the box to reveal a ring. Not an engagement ring, but a simple gold band. "It's a promise," Daniel said softly, "that I'll never hurt you again, that I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." Sophie stared at the ring, her heart a storm of emotions. A part of her wanted to believe him, to accept the gesture and hold on to the love they had built. But another part of her screamed that promises were fragile, that words and rings could not erase the nights he had spent in someone else's arms. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I don't know if I can accept this." Daniel's face fell, but he didn't push. He set the box on the table and walked away quietly. Sophie sat there for hours, staring at the ring, torn between two futures. One with him, full of uncertainty and the possibility of healing, and one without him, terrifyingly empty, yet full of potential. And for the first time, she realized the decision wasn't about Daniel at all. It was about her. Sophie woke the next morning to an emptiness beside her. Daniel was already gone, his side of the bed cool, the faint scent of his cologne lingering on the sheets. For a moment, she let herself imagine it was a normal day, that he'd left early for work, that everything between them was fine, that her life hadn't been fractured into pieces she was still trying to glue back together. But when she turned and saw the small ring box still sitting unopened on the nightstand, the weight of reality came crashing back. The promise ring was a symbol of his desperation, not his love. That's how it felt, at least. Sophie knew that if she accepted it, she'd be saying she was willing to forget, to bury the betrayal in the ground and pretend that it never happened, and she couldn't do that. Later that afternoon, Sophie met Michael again. This time it wasn't an accident. He had texted her after finding her number through a mutual friend, asking if she wanted to grab lunch. She hesitated, her chest tightening with guilt. Was it wrong to meet him again, knowing how fragile things were with Daniel? But she told herself it was innocent, that she needed a friend. Michael was waiting at a small cafe near the park, and his smile immediately disarmed her. He looked almost the same as he had in college, though a little older, a little more weathered by life. They spent hours talking, sharing stories about the years they'd missed in each other's lives. At one point, he leaned forward, his eyes soft. "You don't seem happy, Sophie. Are you okay?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Things are complicated." "With Daniel?" She nodded, fiddling with the rim of her coffee cup. He made some mistakes, and I don't know if we can come back from them." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't press. "You deserve better," he said simply. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had heard them from Emily too, but coming from Michael, they felt different, gentler, almost protective, and dangerous. When Sophie returned home that evening, Daniel was waiting in the kitchen. He looked up sharply when she walked in, his eyes narrowing. "Where were you?" Her chest tightened. "I told you I was meeting a friend." His voice was low, tense. "Michael?" She froze, and that hesitation was enough. Daniel's expression hardened. "Sophie," he said, his tone sharper now, "you can't keep doing this. If you want to fix us, then we need to focus on us, not him." Anger flared in her chest. "Do you even hear yourself? You spent 6 months with another woman, lying to me every single day, and now you're upset that I had coffee with a friend?" Daniel's face flushed, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "That's different." "No, it's not different," Sophie snapped, her voice trembling. "It's the same, except I didn't betray you. I didn't lie. I didn't sneak around behind your back." The silence between them crackled with fury. Finally, Daniel's shoulders slumped, his anger replaced with exhaustion. "I'm scared of losing you," he admitted quietly. "I can't handle the thought of you with someone else." Her heart twisted, because she believed him, but she also realized something else, that his fear of losing her wasn't the same as valuing her. It was about control, about ownership. The tension only grew worse over the next few weeks. Daniel became hyper-aware of her every move, his questions sharp, his suspicion constant. Sophie felt suffocated, trapped between his guilt and his jealousy. One night, after another argument, she grabbed her coat and left, needing air, needing space. She walked for blocks until she found herself outside Michael's apartment building. She hadn't planned it, but her feet had carried her there anyway. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, his expression shifted instantly to concern. "Sophie? What's wrong?" Her voice cracked. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. I don't know who I am when I'm with him." He pulled her inside, closing the door gently behind them. "You don't have to explain," he said softly. "Just breathe." For the first time in months, Sophie felt safe. They sat on his couch, talking late into the night. Michael didn't push, didn't pry. He just listened. At one point, when she broke down crying, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, letting her lean against him. It was innocent, but it wasn't. She knew that. She knew lines were blurring, and that terrified her almost as much as staying with Daniel did. When she finally left, he walked her to the door. His eyes lingered on hers for a moment too long, and she felt the air shift between them. She stepped out before anything could happen, her heart pounding. The following weekend, Daniel found the courage to ask the question Sophie had been dreading. "Are you in love with him?" They were sitting in the living room, the TV playing in the background, though neither of them was watching. His voice was quiet, almost broken. Sophie froze. "Daniel, just answer me." His eyes were raw, desperate. "I'm not in love with him," she said honestly, "but I don't know what I feel anymore. About you, about us, about myself." He closed his eyes, pain etched into his face. "That's worse." Her throat tightened. "Why?" "Because if you hated me, if you wanted to leave, at least that would be clear. But this is limbo, and I can't live like this." For the first time, Sophie realized Daniel wasn't the only one unraveling. She was too. And maybe they were dragging each other down. Their biggest fight came a few days later. It started over something small. Daniel asking why she hadn't answered his call. Sophie snapping that she wasn't required to account for every second of her life. But the argument spiraled quickly, years of pain and resentment spilling into the open. "You destroyed us, Daniel," Sophie shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You chose her over me for 6 months, and now you expect me to just pretend it never happened?" Daniel's voice cracked, louder than she had ever heard it. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Sophie. Why can't you see that I'm trying to make it right?" "Because it's not enough. Nothing you do will ever erase what you did. You broke me. You broke us. And I don't know if I'll ever be whole again." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's chest heaved as he stared at her, his face pale and stricken. Finally, his voice was barely a whisper. "Then, what are we doing here?" Sophie had no answer. She walked out, slamming the door behind her, the sound echoing like the crack of something final. That night, Sophie stayed at Emily's again, lying awake as her mind replayed the fight over and over. The question haunted her. What are we doing here? She didn't know. But for the first time, she began to imagine a life where she wasn't asking that question anymore. A life without Daniel. Sophie didn't return home that night. She stayed at Emily's, staring at the ceiling while the city outside buzzed with life she couldn't feel part of. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Then what are we doing here? And the silence that followed them had been heavier than any fight they'd ever had. The next morning, Emily made coffee and set it in front of her. "You know, Soph, sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. You can't keep bleeding just to keep something alive." Sophie nodded, though the words felt like salt on a wound. She wanted clarity, a clear direction, but all she had was confusion. Later that day, she met Michael again, this time at the park. It wasn't planned. She had texted him in a moment of weakness, and he had come without hesitation. They walked slowly among the trees, the autumn air crisp, leaves crunching underfoot. "You look tired," Michael said gently. "I am," Sophie admitted. "I feel like I'm carrying a weight I can't set down." He stopped, turning to face her. "Then maybe it's time to put it down." The simplicity of his words cut through her turmoil. She looked into his eyes and saw no judgment, no expectation, just quiet support. For a moment, she felt tears sting her eyes, and Michael reached out, brushing her hand with his. The touch was small, but it sent a rush of warmth through her, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She pulled her hand back quickly, guilt flooding her. I shouldn't. Daniel and it's complicated. Michael's voice was calm. I know. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to be okay. Those words lingered with her long after they parted. When Sophie returned to the apartment that evening, Daniel was waiting. His face was drawn, his eyes dark from lack of sleep. Where were you? His voice was sharp, but beneath it was fear. Sophie set her bag down slowly. Walking, thinking. With him? Her silence was answer enough. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. Sophie, I can't keep living like this, wondering where you are, who you're with. If you want to be with him, just say it. Her chest tightened. It's not about him, Daniel. It's about us. About what you did to us. I know, he burst out, his voice cracking. And I hate myself for it, every day. But I can't lose you. I won't. The desperation in his eyes scared her. Not because it was violent, but because it was so raw, so consuming. She realized Daniel wasn't just fighting for their relationship. He was fighting for his own sense of control, for the image of the life they had built together. And maybe that was the problem. That night, Sophie lay awake, listening to Daniel's breathing beside her. She felt like a stranger in her own bed, caught between two lives. One tied to the man she had loved for years, and another she hadn't yet fully imagined, but could almost see shimmering on the horizon. For the first time, she allowed herself to picture it clearly, a life without Daniel. Waking up in her own space, not walking on eggshells, not carrying the weight of betrayal. Maybe it was lonely at first, maybe it was scary, but it was hers. The thought both terrified and comforted her. The next day, she called the couple's therapist to cancel their session. When Daniel found out, his face fell. Why would you do that? He asked, quietly. Sophie met his gaze, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Because I don't think therapy can fix this. I don't think we can fix this. Daniel's eyes filled with panic. Don't say that, please, Soph, don't give up on us. But she didn't answer. For the first time, she wasn't sure she had anything left to give. Sophie spent the following days moving through her life in a haze. Work felt mechanical, meals tasteless, conversations empty. Every moment she wasn't distracted was filled with the gnawing awareness that a decision loomed over her like a storm cloud. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, Sophie sat at their kitchen table with her laptop. She opened a folder she hadn't touched in months, apartment listings. Scrolling through them felt like a forbidden act, as if simply imagining a life outside these walls was betrayal in itself. But as she clicked through photo after photo, small studios, one-bedroom apartments, places with light streaming through windows, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. She closed the laptop the moment Daniel's footsteps sounded, her heart pounding as if she had been caught stealing. Everything okay? He asked, towel wrapped around his shoulders. Yeah, she lied. Just checking emails. Daniel didn't push, but the way he lingered in the doorway made her wonder if he sensed the distance growing between them. 2 nights later, Daniel surprised her with dinner. He had cooked, something he rarely did, and set the table with candles and wine. I thought we could have a night just us, he said, forcing a smile. Sophie tried. She really did. She listened as he talked about his day, laughed at his half-hearted jokes, and complimented the food even though it was slightly overcooked. For a brief moment, there was a glimpse of the man she had once adored, the man who had made her believe in forever. But it didn't last. Halfway through the meal, Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm, almost pleading. Sophie, I know I've messed up, but I love you. I can't lose you. Tell me what I have to do and I'll do it. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something kind, something that wouldn't break him further, but the truth pressed against her ribs like a blade. I don't know if love is enough anymore, she whispered. Daniel's hand recoiled as if burned. His face crumpled, pain flashing across his features. He opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again, staring at his plate instead. The silence that followed was unbearable. The next morning, Sophie packed a small bag, just enough for a night or two. She told Daniel she needed space, that she'd be staying at Emily's for a while. His reaction was immediate and explosive. "What do you mean space?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "You can't just walk out." "I'm not walking out," Sophie said carefully, keeping her tone calm. "I just need to think without all this pressure. I can't breathe in here." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. "If you leave, Sophie, I don't know if you'll come back." The truth was, she didn't know either. At Emily's, Sophie finally allowed herself to exhale. The apartment was small and cluttered, but it felt safe. Emily handed her a blanket and didn't ask questions. Sometimes silence was the greatest gift. That night, Sophie lay awake again, scrolling through the apartment listings. This time, she let herself linger. She bookmarked the place, a small one-bedroom with hardwood floors and a balcony. She imagined herself sitting out there with coffee in the morning, her own space, her own peace. For the first time, the idea of leaving didn't just feel like an escape. It felt like freedom. Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling. Alone in their apartment, he stared at the half-empty closet where Sophie's clothes had once been. He replayed every moment of the past year, every choice that had led them here. Regret ate at him like acid. He called Sophie 3 times that night. She didn't answer. By the next day, his desperation had shifted into determination. If he couldn't reach her with words, he would reach her with actions. He started planning. Flowers, gestures, promises he hadn't yet figured out how to keep. He was willing to do anything, except the one thing Sophie truly needed, to let her go. Sophie met Michael again a few days later. She hadn't meant to. It was Emily who suggested coffee at a little cafe downtown, and Michael happened to be there. Their eyes met across the room, and Sophie's heart gave a traitorous flutter. They sat together, talking quietly. "You look lighter," Michael said. "I moved out," Sophie admitted. "Not permanently, not yet, but I needed space." A soft smile touched his lips. "That's brave." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel brave, it feels terrifying." Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Sometimes the scariest steps are the ones that matter most." Sophie swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. That night, she returned to Emily's and found Daniel waiting outside the building. He held a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, and his face was streaked with tears. "Sophie, please," he begged, thrusting the flowers toward her. "I'll do anything, I'll change. Just come home." Her chest ached at the sight of him. For a moment, she almost gave in, almost let pity guide her back into the life she no longer wanted. But then she remembered the balcony, the morning coffee, the feeling of breathing freely for the first time in months. She shook her head slowly. "Daniel, I don't think I can." His face broke, anguish twisting his features. He dropped the flowers, his hands trembling. "Don't say that. Don't throw us away." But as Sophie walked past him into the building, she knew the truth. She wasn't throwing anything away. She was finally reclaiming herself. Sophie sat at the edge of Emily's couch, staring at her phone. Daniel's missed calls filled the screen. 10, 20, 30. Each one felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She wanted to silence the device, throw it across the room, but some part of her couldn't look away. Each call was a reminder of the man she had once loved, the life they had once shared. Emily appeared from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You don't have to answer," she said gently. "I know." Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "But what if something happens to him? What if—" Emily sat down beside her, pressing the mug into her hands. "Sav, You can't be responsible for his choices. You carried that burden long enough. Sophie nodded, but her heart twisted anyway. She wanted to believe Emily was right. The next day, Sophie returned to the apartment, not because she wanted to, but because she needed closure. She needed to see Daniel face to face and say the words she had been avoiding. When she opened the door, she found the place in disarray. Dishes piled high in the sink, laundry scattered, half-empty bottles on the counter. Daniel sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television, though it wasn't even on. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven. "You came back," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just to talk," Sophie replied, keeping her distance. Daniel's lips trembled as he stood. "We don't have to end this. We can fix it. Please, Sophie." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay steady. "Daniel, I've tried. We've both tried. But it's broken. And staying together isn't healing us. It's killing us." He shook his head violently, tears spilling down his cheeks. No, you don't mean that. You still love me. I know you do." "I care about you," Sophie said softly. "I always will. But love isn't supposed to feel like this. Not anymore." Daniel crumbled, collapsing onto the couch, his shoulders shaking. Sophie wanted to rush to him, to comfort him the way she always had, but she stayed where she was. She knew if she touched him, she might never leave. "I don't know how to live without you," Daniel whispered. "You'll learn," she said, her own tears threatening. "We both will." The silence between them stretched, heavy with finality. Sophie picked up the small bag she had packed weeks ago, the one she never truly unpacked, and slung it over her shoulder. She took one last look around the apartment, at the walls that had witnessed their love, their laughter, their betrayal. It felt like a chapter closing. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she whispered. And then she left. The weeks that followed were not easy. Sophie moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, the same one she had bookmarked online. It was sparse at first. A mattress on the floor, a second-hand couch, a chipped table by the window, but it was hers. Every creak of the floorboards, every patch of sunlight that spilled across the balcony belonged to her alone. She cried often in those early days. Some nights she curled up on the couch and wondered if she had made a mistake. But then morning would come, and she would brew coffee, step out onto the balcony, and breathe. Each breath reminded her why she had left. Michael remained in her life, carefully, respectfully. He didn't push, didn't rush. He simply showed up when she needed a friend, helping her carry boxes, fixing a leaky faucet, bringing takeout on nights when she was too exhausted to cook. One evening, as they sat together on her balcony, Sophie turned to him. "Do you ever feel guilty for us?" Michael's expression softened. "Sometimes. But then I remember that what we have now isn't built on lies. It's built on honesty and choice." Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with both fear and hope. She wasn't ready to label what they had, but she knew it was real. Months passed. Sophie settled into her new routine. She decorated her apartment with plants and books, framed photographs of sunsets she had taken on quiet walks. Slowly, she began to feel like herself again. Not the version of her that had been defined by betrayal, but someone new, someone stronger. Daniel reached out a few times, his messages softer now, less desperate. He said he was sorry. He hoped she was doing okay. He said he was trying to get better. Sophie replied politely, but kept her distance. She knew she couldn't heal if she kept reopening the wound. 1 year later, Sophie stood on her balcony as the sun dipped below the horizon. The city lights flickered to life, and the air buzzed with the hum of evening traffic. She thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the heartbreak, the nights of doubt. And then she thought about where she was now. She had her own home, her own peace, a relationship, whatever it might become, with someone who respected her. Most importantly, she had herself. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. She wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore. She wasn't trapped in the past. She was free. Epilogue. Months later, Sophie met Daniel by chance at a cafe. He looked healthier, calmer. They exchanged polite words, no bitterness between them. When they parted, Sophie felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she still needed. Walking home, Michael's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Sophie glanced up at him, then at the path ahead. Her story wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was hers, and that was enough.